The horizon churns with 1,000 riders. For a moment, forget their swords and their bows. Look instead at the saddlebags. What powered the unstoppable Mongol warrior across continents was not just skill or strategy, but something far more fundamental: their next meal. I want to solve a delicious historical mystery with you. How did the diet of these nomadic people enable them to build the largest contiguous land empire in history? By the end, you will know the exact foods that fueled conquests from the Pacific Ocean to the gates of Vienna. We will uncover why a bag of rock-hard meat was more valuable than gold, and how a drink made from horse milk became a secret weapon. What is the most surprising thing you think a conqueror might carry in their pocket? That next meal was a direct result of the world they called home. The Mongolian steppe is a vast, open grassland, a sea of rolling hills under an enormous sky. It is a place of breathtaking beauty and brutal reality. Winters plunge temperatures to 40 below zero, with winds that feel like knives. Summers can be scorching and dry. In this environment, farming as settled peoples knew it was nearly impossible. You could not rely on a field of wheat or a vineyard. Your survival, your entire way of life, moved on 4 legs. This was a nomadic existence, following the herds to fresh pastures, and that rhythm dictated every single thing they ate. Their diet was not a matter of preference, it was a masterpiece of adaptation. The cornerstone of their survival were the animals they lived alongside, often called the Five Snouts. These were not just livestock, they were a mobile utility company. The horse provided speed, status, and warfare. Sheep and goats gave wool for felt tents, skins for clothing, and a constant supply of meat and milk. Cattle were a source of strength and dairy, while the hardy Bactrian camel could carry immense loads across the driest deserts. Every part of these animals was used, leaving almost no waste. From this intimate, dependent relationship with their herds came a food system perfectly designed for motion and endurance. The steppe did not offer a grocery store. It offered a survival blueprint written in milk, meat, and marrow. Of all the Five Snouts, one stood supreme. The Mongol horse was not a luxury. It was the ultimate war machine, a living extension of the warrior himself. Every soldier would bring a string of several horses, rotating them so that each animal stayed fresh over immense distances. This gave the Mongol armies a staggering tactical advantage, appearing and disappearing with a speed that seemed supernatural to their enemies. But the horse's value went far beyond its hooves. It was, in essence, a mobile dairy. The primary beverage of the steppe, consumed daily by men, women, and children, was airag, fermented mare's milk. The process was a delicate art. Fresh mare's milk, which is surprisingly sweet and watery compared to cow's milk, would be poured into a large leather sack called a cock-hooer. A special wooden paddle would churn it for hours, often while strapped to the saddle, so the constant motion of the ride would do the work. This fermentation created a slightly fizzy, tangy drink, low in alcohol but packed with nutrition. Think of it as the ancient world's ultimate probiotic smoothie. Airag was rich in vitamins C and B, and its live cultures aided digestion and helped prevent illness, a critical advantage when living in close quarters on campaign. It hydrated warriors in a way water alone could not, replenishing electrolytes and calories. And then there was the horse's most extreme provision, a legend that has echoed through history. In a true emergency, when no other food was available, a warrior could survive on the blood of his own mount. This was not an act of slaughter. It was a precise, practiced technique. The rider would make a small incision in the neck vein of the horse, drawing off a cup or two of blood, then seal the wound with ash or dung. The horse would recover, and the warrior would gain a dense, iron-rich meal that could stave off starvation for another day. This was the depth of the partnership. The horse provided speed, sustenance, and in the direst hour, life itself. But meat was the true staple, the caloric engine of the empire, and the Mongols had perfected a way to make it last forever. Yet the horse's blood was a last resort, a hidden trick for survival. The true everyday fuel of the Mongol warrior was solid, reliable meat. On the vast steppe, this came from 2 sources: the wild game of the land and the herds they owned. Hunting was not a sport, It was a mirror of war. The Mongols organized enormous, coordinated drives called the nurj. Imagine a circle of riders, hundreds or even thousands strong, silently moving across the plains. They would slowly converge, driving every animal within that enormous ring: deer, antelope, wild sheep, even wolves and foxes, toward a central point. The scale was breathtaking, a controlled chaos that taught discipline, communication, and precision archery. For a young warrior, the nurj was his training ground. The pressure, the coordination, the split-second decisions, all directly translated to the battlefield. The game provided variety: wild sheep for hearty stews, deer for tender cuts, and even marmots, which were hunted and cooked in their own skins. But the steady supply came from their own herds. While they cherished their horses, they rarely ate them. The primary sources of meat were sheep and goats. A single sheep could feed a family for days. The consumption was systematic and respectful. Every part was used, the meat eaten, the bones boiled for broth, the fat rendered for cooking and lamp fuel. Yet here was the central problem for an army on the move. How do you feed tens of thousands of men when you are riding 50 miles a day, far from your herds? You cannot bring live sheep on a blitzkrieg campaign. The solution was a form of food so durable it defied time. They would slice meat, often from the back of a sheep or a goat, into long, thin strips. These strips were hung in the dry, cold steppe air, sometimes lightly salted, and left to cure. The wind and sun would leach out all the moisture, leaving behind something as hard as wood. This was borts, the ultimate campaign ration. A warrior could carry a large leather bag of this rock-hard substance. To eat it, he would shave off slivers with his knife, either chewing it directly like a potent, meaty gum, or more commonly, dropping the shavings into a pot of boiling water. Within minutes, the borts would reconstitute, transforming back into a rich, nourishing broth and tender meat. A small bag could last a single soldier for months. This was the secret behind those impossible marches. Their food weighed almost nothing, never spoiled, and packed a massive caloric punch, while European knights relied on supply trains of bread and salted meat that could rot or be ambushed. Every Mongol rider carried a complete, lightweight pantry on his saddle. But meat and milk alone do not make a complete diet. What did they eat when the hunt failed and the bort's bag ran low? The answer lies in the most unexpected places, and in foods they learned to take from the very people they conquered. The rock-hard borts was a masterpiece of preservation, but it was not the only transformation happening on the steppe. While meat provided the protein, the true nutritional backbone, the daily bread of the Mongol world, came in white. Dairy was not just a drink or a topping, it was an entire food category engineered for survival. The milk from their sheep, goats, cows, and mares was processed into a stunning array of products, each designed to solve a specific problem of nomadic life. We have already met airag, the fermented mare's milk, but that was just the beginning. Take fresh milk, and you could gently heat it and culture it into yogurt, a thick, tangy food that was easy to digest and full of gut-friendly bacteria. They would often let this yogurt ferment further, then churn it to separate the solids from the liquid. The solids became a fresh, soft cheese, while the golden fat that rose to the top was skimmed off as butter. This butter was not just for eating. It could be sealed in leather bags and buried in the cool ground, where it would keep for years, a stored treasure of calories and fat for the harsh winter months. But perhaps the most ingenious dairy creation was aaruul. After making cheese, the curds were pressed and then shaped into small, flat discs or strips. These were left out in the sun and wind to dry completely, becoming a substance as hard as stone. Aaruul was a travel food par excellence. It was lightweight, would never spoil, and was packed with protein, fat, and calcium. A warrior could pop a piece in his mouth and let it slowly soften. A tangy, cheesy morsel that could stave off hunger for hours during a long ride. It was the dairy equivalent of borts, a way to capture the nourishing power of milk and make it immortal. And for celebration or ritual, they took fermentation to its extreme. By distilling fermented milk, they created a clear, potent spirit called arkai. This was a luxury. a powerful drink reserved for special occasions and leaders, showing that even their alcohol sprang from the same essential source. Every single one of these products served a dual purpose. They provided essential fats and calories in a landscape with few fruits or vegetables, and they were all designed to be portable and non-perishable. A family's wealth was not just counted in animals, but in the bags of aaruul, the pots of buried butter, and the skins of airag hanging in their jur. The steppe was a land of scarcity, but through sheer ingenuity, they turned milk into a year-round feast. This ingenious food system meant the Mongol army traveled with its own pantry, not a baggage train. While a European knight required a small caravan to carry his bread, cheese, and salted meats, a Mongol warrior was self-sufficient. His world was contained in a few leather bags tied to his saddle. One held the rock-hard borts, the dried meat that could resurrect into a stew. Another carried discs of aaruul, the sun-dried cheese for a tangy, slow-melting snack. And always, there was the skin of airag, the fermented mare's milk that quenched thirst and fortified the body. This was the campaign diet, a perfect triangle of protein, fat, and probiotics, all weighing almost nothing and lasting forever. It gave them a logistical ghost-like quality. They could move faster, farther, and more independently than any army they faced, because they were not tied to slow-moving supply wagons vulnerable to attack or bad roads. Their supply line was literally strapped to their horses. But even within this system of dried foods, there was one preparation so clever it borders on myth. It was called shumis. A warrior would take a mixture of finely shaved borts and millet, a hardy grain they sometimes acquired through trade, and pack it into a waterproof pouch made from a sheep's stomach. This pouch was not carried in a bag. It was placed directly under the saddle, against the sweating flank of the horse. Over hours of riding, the horse's body heat and sweat would gently steam and soften the contents. By the time the rider stopped for a brief rest, he could open the pouch and eat a warm, pre-cooked, and ready meal without ever lighting a fire. It was a slow cooker powered by the engine of conquest itself. This level of logistical simplicity was terrifying to their enemies. How do you starve out an army that carries months of food on its person, and can cook a meal without stopping? The answer is, you cannot. Their diet was their strategy, woven into the very fabric of their movement. Yet, the story does not end on the steppe. As their empire exploded outward, they encountered walled cities, lush farmlands, and cuisines they had never imagined. And here, the narrative of the Mongol diet takes a fascinating and unexpected turn. This rock-hard substance was more than just dried meat. It was a concentrated block of energy and strategy. Borts was the ultimate superfood of the steppe, a product of necessity refined to perfection. The process began after a successful hunt or the slaughter of a sheep from the herd. The finest cuts, often from the back or leg, were carefully sliced into long, thin strips, almost like ribbons of meat. These strips were then lightly salted, not just for flavor, but to draw out moisture and inhibit bacteria. Then came the most natural preservative on Earth, the relentless wind of the Mongolian plateau. The meat ribbons were hung on lines outside the family's jur, left to bask in the dry, cold air for weeks. The wind and sun worked together, slowly leaching every drop of water from the fibers until the strips became dark, brittle, and as hard as a piece of wood or even stone. You could literally knock two pieces together and hear a solid clack. This was borts in its final, indestructible form. A warrior would pack a large leather bag full of these hardened strips, and this bag became his lifeline. Its efficiency was breathtaking. When the army made camp, a soldier would simply take a piece of borts and shave thin slivers off it with his knife, dropping them into a pot of boiling water. Almost magically, the water would transform into a rich, nourishing broth, and the shavings would soften back into tender, flavorful meat. A single bag could feed a man for months, and a few pieces could make a soup to sustain a small group. This meant an army carried virtually no waste, required no bulky supplies, and could move with a speed and freedom that seemed impossible to their adversaries. But the ingenuity did not stop at meat. Every part of the animal was engineered for portability. Intestines, thoroughly cleaned and dried, became natural casings for sausage, filled with minced meat and fat. Rendered animal fat, stored in bladders or stomachs, was a precious commodity, a dense source of calories used for cooking or even as an emergency ration, eaten straight or spread on borts. The Mongol saddlebag was a masterpiece of food science, containing a complete, lightweight, and long-lasting nutritional system that turned each rider into his own mobile supply depot. But the very toughness of their rations gave rise to a persistent myth. Many imagined the Mongols as savage barbarians tearing into raw, bloody flesh. The truth is far more practical and more interesting. While a warrior in the direst emergency might eat frozen meat or the partially warmed chumis from under his saddle, the Mongols were not raw meat eaters by choice. In fact, they were masters of the fire and the pot. Cooking was not a luxury. It was a cornerstone of survival on the open steppe. Boiling meat killed parasites and bacteria, making it safe to eat. More importantly, it allowed them to render every last bit of precious fat and nutrition from the bones, creating a rich, life-sustaining broth. Their primary cooking vessel was a massive iron or bronze cauldron, a central fixture in every family jur. Into this pot would go chunks of meat, often from a freshly slaughtered sheep, along with bones and water. This would simmer for hours, producing a hearty stew. But they had another, more ingenious method for special occasions, called cork hog. For this, they would build a fire and heat stones until they were glowing red. Then, they would take a cleaned animal stomach or a sealed leather container, and layer the hot stones inside with pieces of meat, sometimes with vegetables like wild onions or roots. The container was sealed tightly, and the radiant heat from the stones would slowly, evenly roast the meat from the inside out. The result was incredibly tender, smoky, and flavorful. They also roasted meat directly over open flames, especially after a successful hunt. So the image of the blood-smeared warrior is a fiction. The reality was a people who understood food science intuitively, who knew that cooking unlocked energy, ensured safety, and turned a simple meal into a shared ritual. Their fires burned not just for warmth, but to transform the gifts of the steppe into the fuel of an empire. And as their world expanded, they would discover new flavors that would forever change their own menu. The cauldron of the empire was about to get a lot bigger. As the Mongols burst beyond the windswept steppe, they encountered a world of settled agriculture that must have seemed like a fantastical garden. Under rulers like Kublai Khan, who established the Yuan dynasty in China, the Mongol conquest shifted from pure extraction to a more complex administration. They now ruled over millions of farmers, and with that rule came an inevitable exchange at the dinner table. The warrior's leather bag, once holding only borts and aaruul, now had room for new treasures. The first was grain. On the steppe, grain was a rare luxury, acquired through trade. But in China, it was the foundation of civilization. Suddenly, millet, rice, and wheat became available on a staggering scale. These were not just foods, they were logistical solutions. Grains could be stored for even longer than dried meat, and they provided the carbohydrates that offered sustained energy for a vast, stationary imperial bureaucracy. The Mongols quickly saw their value. Imperial supply lines now funneled rice from the southern paddas and wheat from the northern plains to feed the growing population of soldiers and officials in cities like Khanbalik, modern-day Beijing. But the Mongols did not just take the grain, they embraced the technology that came with it. They encountered noodles, a food that could be dried and stored almost as well as their own borts. And they discovered dumplings. The concept of wrapping minced meat in a thin dough casing was a revelation. It was efficient, portable, and delicious. Historians believe this encounter likely gave birth to dishes like booze, the steamed dumplings that are a national dish of Mongolia today. Imagine a Mongol cook, used to boiling meat in a cauldron, seeing a Chinese chef deftly folding delicate parcels. The idea merged perfectly with their existing food culture of minced meats and portable meals. Now, a warrior could have a complete, self-contained package of meat and grain, all in one handy bite. This expansion created a fascinating dietary split. For the settled imperial court and the armies in garrison, the diet diversified significantly. They ate rice porridge, wheat noodles in broth, and steamed dumplings filled with mutton. Yet, for the hardcore cavalry units, the tumen that remained the empire's sharpest weapon, the core diet stubbornly held to its roots. These warriors, often rotating back to the steppe or constantly on campaign, still relied on their airag, their borts, and their dried dairy. The grain supplies from conquered lands fed the empire's body, but the animal-based foods of the steppe still powered its fist. This duality reveals a crucial truth. The Mongols were brilliant adapters, taking what served them from the cultures they dominated. But at their heart, they never forgot what made them unstoppable in the first place. The taste of the open sky and the strength of the herd were comforts no imperial palace could fully replace. And as their influence stretched west, another culinary exchange was brewing, one that would send shockwaves all the way to Europe. Yet this exchange of foods was not the only cultural current flowing through the empire. For all their discipline and logistical genius, the Mongols understood the power of a shared drink to bind people together. At the heart of this was their relationship with alcohol, a practice steeped in ritual and strict control. The daily airag, that fizzy fermented mare's milk, was more than a beverage. It was a social glue, a symbol of hospitality, and a mild, nutritious staple. When a guest entered a jur, they were always offered a bowl of airag first. To refuse was a grave insult. This ritual reinforced community bonds and honored the animals that made life possible. But airag was only the beginning. Through a process of distillation, they created a far more potent spirit called arkai. This clear, strong alcohol, often compared to vodka, was reserved for the elite, for victory celebrations, and for important ceremonies. It was a luxury item, a marker of status in a society that valued strength and achievement. However, the Mongols were fiercely pragmatic about its use, especially in war. Genghis Khan and his successors knew that an undisciplined army was a defeated one. While on campaign, the consumption of arkai and even excessive airag was heavily restricted. There are accounts of severe punishments for drunkenness while in the field. This discipline was a key component of their success, ensuring that every warrior remained sharp, alert, and ready to move at a moment's notice. The contrast, however, is striking. Once a campaign was over and victory secured, the same commanders who enforced sobriety would host enormous feasts that could last for days. At these gatherings, drinking was not just allowed, it was actively encouraged as a way to celebrate, redistribute wealth, and solidify loyalty. Vast quantities of arkai and airag would flow, toasts would be made to the heavens and to the Khan, and the line between warrior and reveler would blur. Beyond its social role, the mild alcohol in airag served a practical purpose. In a world without modern medicine, the fermentation process acted as a natural antiseptic, making the milk safer to drink than plain water from uncertain sources. It also provided a reliable source of calories and essential vitamins during the long, barren winters. So the Mongol relationship with alcohol was a perfect balance of two extremes: rigid control when focus was needed, and communal release when the time was right. It was a tool both for the body and for the empire. The discipline of the campaign gave way to the spectacle of the court. After the dust of conquest settled, the true power of the Mongol table was revealed not in the saddlebag, but in the grand feast. These were not mere celebrations, they were intricate performances of politics, designed to awe, reward, and control. When a Khan called his commanders and foreign ambassadors to his great tent, the spread was a deliberate display of abundance from every corner of the empire. Whole horses, roasted on spits, symbolized the ultimate sacrifice of their most cherished animal. Dozens of sheep would be prepared, their skins carefully removed and then replaced after cooking, so they arrived at the table looking as if they were merely sleeping on a bed of herbs. Game like deer and swan, luxuries from conquered forests, showed the Khan's reach, but the most symbolic dish of all was the fatty tail of a sheep, a prized cut known for its rich, unctuous flavor. This was presented, with great ceremony, to the most honored guest at the feast, To receive it was a public declaration of the Khan's highest favor, a gesture that bound the recipient in a web of gratitude and obligation. The act of offering it was just as important, demonstrating the leader's generosity and his role as the provider for all. Every custom had meaning, the strict order of serving, the specific cuts given to specific ranks, even the direction in which a platter was passed, all reinforced the unshakable hierarchy of the empire. You did not just eat at the Khan's table, you performed your place in his world. These feasts were a tool of statecraft as sharp as any arrow. A disgruntled general, lavished with delicacies and public praise, might feel his ambitions soften. A visiting prince, overwhelmed by the sheer scale and opulence, would understand the futility of resistance. The message was clear. This power could provide unimaginable bounty, and it could just as easily take it away. The communal cauldron of the steppe had become a calculated instrument of rule, where every bite was a silent treaty. But even at the height of imperial feasting, the foundation of the Mongol diet remained rooted in the land itself. Beyond the herds and the grand displays, there was a silent partner in their survival, the wild bounty of the steppe. This was not a cuisine of only meat and milk. The Mongols were expert foragers, with a deep, generational knowledge of every edible plant their harsh home offered. In the brief, vibrant summers, they would gather wild onions and garlic, their pungent bulbs adding crucial flavor and medicinal properties to stews. They sought out tart berries and the stalks of wild rhubarb, a sour treat that could be eaten fresh or dried for later. These were not mere garnishes. They were vital sources of vitamins C and A, nutrients scarce in a purely animal-based diet. This foraging was their primary defense against scurvy, the debilitating disease that crippled so many other armies and sailors who lacked fresh produce. The steppe also provided wild grains and seeds, which women would patiently collect in small quantities, to be ground and added to soups or mixed with dairy. This practice highlights a critical point often missed. The Mongols were not just passive recipients of a meat-centric fate. They were active, brilliant botanists of their own ecosystem. Their adaptability was total. They could build an empire on horseback, yet they also knew exactly where to find the wild onion patch that would keep their warriors healthy. This knowledge, passed from mother to daughter, from elder to child, completed the nutritional circle. The herds provided the calories and protein for immense endurance, but the foraged greens, roots, and berries provided the micronutrients for sustained health. It was this complete package, this marriage of the pastoral and the gathered, that created warriors who were not just strong, but resilient over years of campaign. Their dinner was a map of the steppe itself, written in grass, berry, and root. A diet built on dried meat and milk might sound monotonous, even bland to our modern palates. But the Mongol table was far from flavorless. It was seasoned by necessity, ingenuity, and the vast trade networks their empire created. The most fundamental seasoning was also one of their most precious commodities, salt. On the steppe, natural salt deposits were rare treasures, often traded over long distances. A small bag of salt was worth its weight in utility. It was essential for preserving meat into borts. It enhanced the natural flavors of stews, and it provided crucial minerals lost through the physical exertion of riding and fighting. But salt was just the beginning. The wild onions and garlic they foraged were not just nutritional stops against scurvy. They were the flavor base of countless meals. Chopped and tossed into a boiling cauldron, they would infuse the broth with a pungent, savory depth that transformed simple meat and water into something complex and satisfying. Then there were the hidden flavor agents already present in their world. When an animal was slaughtered, nothing was wasted. Blood, often collected carefully, was used to thicken and enrich soups and stews, adding a deep, iron-rich taste and valuable protein. Organs like the heart, liver, and kidneys were prized for their intense, concentrated flavors, often cooked quickly or added to the communal pot. Even the bones, boiled for hours, released their marrow, creating a broth of unbelievable richness and mouthfeel. Flavor also came from the very methods they used to prepare food. Smoking meat over a fire of specific woods would impart a savory, preserved taste. The process of fermentation, so central to their dairy, also created complex tangy and sour notes in their airag and cheeses. And as the Silk Road fell under their control, a trickle of exotic possibilities began. Caravans now moved safely from Persia, India, and beyond, and it is almost certain that spices like black pepper, cumin, and cinnamon found their way into the packs of wealthy commanders or into the kitchens of the imperial court. For the average warrior on the move, flavor was the taste of wood smoke on his borts, the tang of wild garlic in his broth, and the salty, umami richness of a stew made with every part of the animal. Their cuisine was a direct, unfiltered expression of their environment, seasoned by the very earth they rode across and the sky under which they cooked. This mastery of flavor was matched by an even more vital discipline. In the vast, arid expanses of the steppe, water was not just a resource, it was a sacred, strategic commodity. The Mongols became unparalleled experts in the art of finding it. They could read the landscape with an almost supernatural skill, knowing that a certain bend in a dry riverbed might hide a seep, or that a particular type of green vegetation signaled a hidden spring just below the surface. Their survival and the success of their armies depended on this knowledge, but finding water was only half the battle. Using it wisely was a matter of ironclad law. Under the Yasa, the legal code of Genghis Khan, polluting a water source was one of the most severe crimes imaginable. No one was allowed to wash their hands or clothing in a running stream. No one could urinate or defecate near a spring. The punishment for such an act could be death. This was not mere superstition, it was profound ecological and military logic. A single contaminated source could sicken an entire army, crippling a campaign before it even met an enemy. They understood that water was the lifeblood of the land itself, and to poison it was to betray the community and the future. So how did tens of thousands of warriors stay hydrated on long marches across dry plains? They turned to their oldest ally, the horse. While they certainly drank water when it was pure and available, their primary beverage was always airag, the fermented mare's milk. This was a stroke of genius. The fermentation process, with its live cultures and mild acidity, acted as a natural purifier, killing harmful bacteria that might lurk in stagnant water. Airag was not only safer to drink than questionable water, it was also more nutritious, providing calories, fats, and vitamins that plain water could not. In extreme scarcity, when neither clear water nor airag was available, a warrior could rely on the mare's milk itself, fresh and unfermented. A soldier could sustain himself for days on the milk from his string of horses, a self-replenishing source of hydration and nourishment that moved right along with him. This strict water discipline created an army that was not only fast and lethal, but also remarkably healthy. While other medieval armies were decimated by dysentery and waterborne plagues, the Mongol host remained in the field year after year, their strength preserved by a simple, fermented drink and a deep, unwavering respect for a single, clear drop. The discipline that protected their water was matched by a biological imperative. When the endless blue sky of the steppe turned iron gray and the wind began to howl, survival shifted to a different kind of warfare. The Mongolian winter is not merely cold, it is an elemental force, with temperatures that could plunge to 40, 50, even 60 degrees below zero. In this frozen world, a warrior's greatest enemy was not a rival army, but the cold itself. And their primary defense was not just their fur-lined deal, but the food they consumed. Every meal became a strategic calculation in thermal energy. The summer diet of lean meat and airag underwent a critical transformation. The focus shifted decisively toward fat, the most concentrated fuel source available. They consumed far more of the fatty tail of the sheep, a prized cut reserved for honored guests in summer but now a vital staple. They rendered animal fat into pure white cakes, eating it straight or mixing it with dried meat and grain for a dense, calorie-packed paste. Bone marrow, scooped from the center of boiled bones, was devoured for its rich, buttery fat and life-giving nutrients. Organ meats, especially the liver and heart, packed with vitamins and iron, became daily fare to stave off deficiency and fatigue. This was not gluttony, it was metabolic science. Digesting fat and protein generates significant internal heat, a process called diet-induced thermogenesis. A high-fat meal was like throwing another log on the internal furnace, helping the body maintain its core temperature against the brutal cold. Their bodies, adapted over generations, became incredibly efficient at using this fat for both energy and insulation. You could think of the winter Mongol warrior as a biological engine, finely tuned to burn the heaviest fuel for the longest, coldest journey. But how did they ensure this fuel supply did not run out when the world itself seemed frozen solid? The landscape itself became their natural freezer. They would slaughter animals in the late autumn when they were fattest from summer grazing. The meat was not always dried into borts immediately. Instead, large cuts would be left outside to freeze solid, preserved perfectly by the sub-zero air. A family or a military unit's food supply might literally be a stack of frozen mutton and horse meat just outside the jur, a wall of sustenance that could last for months. Dairy products followed the same principle. Curds and cheeses were frozen, and even airag could be allowed to freeze into slushy, tangy ice. To eat, they would simply shave or chop off what they needed, dropping the frozen chunks into the ever-boiling cauldron. This practice of cryopreservation meant the army could operate through the winter with a reliable, high-quality food source, turning the season that crippled other armies into a period of strategic mobility. While European knights hunkered down in their stone castles, waiting for spring, the Mongols saw the frozen rivers as highways and the snow-covered plains as fields of opportunity, all because they had learned to eat in a way that turned their own bodies into furnaces, fueled by the very animals that shared their frozen world. But winter's frozen larder was a controlled environment. The true test of the Mongol food system came not in the open field, but when the galloping advance slammed to a halt against stone walls. For all their speed and self-sufficiency, the Mongols were forced to adapt to a form of warfare they despised, the long siege. Their entire strategy was built on movement and shock, on denying the enemy a static target while controlling the terrain. Surrounding a fortified city for months or even years turned their greatest strength into a liability. Suddenly, they could not simply ride away to fresh pastures. The army and its thousands of horses had to be fed in one place. So how did the masters of the mobile pantry feed a stationary host? The answer reveals a brutal yet logical extension of their nomadic mindset. They turned the besieged landscape itself into a giant, temporary steppe. As soon as they encircled the city, their cavalry would fan out across the surrounding countryside, a practice they called the shevichi. They weren't just burning farms to terrorize the populace, though that was part of it. They were conducting the largest livestock roundup in history. Every cow, every sheep, every goat, every pig and chicken from a 50-mile radius would be systematically herded back to the siege camps. These captured animals became their living, breathing, walking supply depot. The Mongols would set up massive temporary corrals, guarded day and night. This allowed them to maintain their preferred diet of fresh meat and dairy, replicating the rhythms of herding life even in the shadow of fortress towers. It was a staggering logistical feat, transforming the agricultural output of an entire region into fuel for conquest. The herds were a resource to be managed, but they were also a ticking clock. If the siege dragged on too long, those animals would be consumed, and when the last sheep was slaughtered, the equation changed dramatically. This is where the historical record grows dark and contested. Chroniclers from the besieged cities, understandably hostile, wrote terrifying accounts of the Mongols resorting to cannibalism during the longest, most desperate sieges. They described scenes of starvation so profound that warriors turned on their own. While we must treat these sources with extreme caution, as they were often written to demonize the enemy, they point to a stark truth. The Mongol system, for all its genius, had a breaking point. It was designed for endless motion, not endless stasis. The psychological horror of a stalled campaign, watching their horses grow thin and their food bags empty, would have been a profound shock to warriors raised on the certainty of the open plain. This grim possibility throws their usual tactics into sharp relief. It explains why they so often preferred to bypass strongholds, or to use terror to encourage surrender before a siege even began. A long siege meant losing control of the one thing they valued above all, their self-sufficiency. It meant trading the freedom of the saddle for the vulnerability of the camp, exchanging their dried borts for the uncertainty of a dwindling herd. The siege diet, therefore, was not a triumph of their system, but a stressful adaptation of it, a reminder that even the most formidable engine of war relied on a simple, unbroken line between the rider, his horse, and the land. Their resilience during a siege was a testament to more than just discipline. It was built into their very meals. The legendary toughness of the Mongol warrior was not a genetic fluke. It was a direct product of a diet that functioned as daily medicine. Every bite and every sip was engineered for survival in a world without doctors or pharmacies. Take the humble airag, that fizzy fermented mare's milk. Beyond its role as a safe beverage, it was a powerful probiotic elixir. The live cultures created during fermentation populated the gut with beneficial bacteria, aiding digestion and bolstering the immune system. In an era when contaminated food or water could kill an army faster than any sword, a daily dose of airag acted as a frontline defense, helping warriors process their rich, fatty meals and fight off pathogens. Their gut health, quite literally, was a military asset. Then there was the silent killer that crippled so many other armies and navies, scurvy. This debilitating disease, caused by a lack of vitamin C, leads to bleeding gums, loose teeth, and crippling fatigue. How did the Mongols, who seemingly ate no fruits or vegetables, avoid it? The answer is in the parts of the animal others might discard. Fresh organ meats, especially the liver and the adrenal glands, are incredibly rich in vitamin C. When a sheep was slaughtered on the steppe, these organs were not wasted. They were prized and consumed quickly, often raw or lightly cooked to preserve their potency. Even the fermented dairy, through the bacterial action, generated small amounts of this crucial vitamin. So while a European sailor on months-long voyages withered from lack of fresh produce, a Mongol rider received his vitamin C from a slice of liver after a successful hunt, or from his skin of airag. This was not accidental nutrition, it was ingrained wisdom. Their culinary tradition was deeply intertwined with what we would call traditional medicine. Specific foods were prescribed for specific ailments. A rich, fatty broth made from boiling bones for hours was not just food. It was considered essential for restoring strength after illness or injury, providing easy-to-digest nutrients and minerals. Certain organ meats were believed to strengthen corresponding parts of the body, eating the heart for courage, or the eyes for sharp sight. While we might separate these beliefs from modern science, the practical outcome was undeniable. Their diet ensured a constant intake of bioavailable iron from red meat and blood, preventing anemia. The high fat content provided sustained energy and thermal regulation. The combination of probiotics, vitamins, and minerals created warriors who could endure physical extremes that would break other men. Their food was their first aid kit, their pharmacy, and their performance enhancer, all carried in a leather bag on the saddle. This biological fortitude meant that when the Mongols arrived at a new frontier, they were not just a military force. They were often the healthiest people in the region, a fact that must have seemed almost supernatural to their beleaguered foes. Yet this biological fortress was sustained by a ruthless, roaming harvest. As the Mongol armies swept across kingdoms, they did not just conquer territory, they consumed its resources with surgical precision. Every town taken, every farmstead passed, became an opportunity for resupply. This was not random plunder, it was a coldly efficient system of foraging at a continental scale. When they descended upon a settled region, their first targets were always the granaries. They would seize entire storehouses of wheat, barley, and millet, loading the grain onto captured carts or the backs of commandeered oxen. These carbohydrates, so rare on the steppe, now flowed into their camps, providing the bulk calories to feed thousands of men and the fodder for tens of thousands of horses. Next came the livestock. They would round up every cow, pig, chicken, and sheep not already hidden, instantly replenishing their mobile herds, but their foraging went beyond staples. They systematically emptied wine cellars and breweries, not for debauchery, but for practical calories and safe hydration. A barrel of wine or beer, already fermented, was often safer to drink than questionable local water, and it carried a morale-boosting energy. This practice served a devastating dual purpose. It fed the Mongol war machine in real time, eliminating the need for a long, vulnerable supply line stretching back to Mongolia. And just as critically, it starved their enemies. By stripping the countryside bare, they crippled the defensive capacity of any fortress or city still holding out. A castle with full storerooms could withstand a siege for years. A castle whose surrounding lands had been scoured clean by Mongol riders might surrender in a matter of weeks. The message was brutal and clear. Resistance meant the total annihilation of the means of life itself. But within this calculated pillage lay the seeds of a quiet culinary revolution. A Mongol warrior used to the tang of airag might take his first sip of rich Persian wine or malty European ale. A commander accustomed to mutton and horse might taste pork for the first time or find himself eating bread, a food so alien it was reportedly called grass cake by some steppe dwellers. They encountered fruits like apricots and grapes from Central Asia, nuts, honey, and vegetables entirely unknown on the windswept plateau. More than just ingredients, they observed new techniques. They saw bread being baked in ovens, stews flavored with complex spice blends, and meats prepared in ways that did not involve drying or boiling. Gradually, through conquest and curiosity, these novelties trickled back to the heart of the empire. The Khan's court in Karakoram or Khanbalik began to feature chefs from across the known world, creating fusion feasts that blended the robust tastes of the steppe with the refined flavors of Persia, China, and beyond. The leather bag was slowly, irrevocably, changing. The diet that had built an empire was now being subtly reshaped by the very empire it had created. This constant, rolling harvest created something far greater than a temporary feast. By securing the trade routes from the Pacific to the Mediterranean, the Mongols did more than just move armies, they moved menus. The period of stability they enforced, known as the Pax Mongolica, turned the Silk Road from a dangerous trickle into a bustling highway. For the first time in centuries, a merchant could travel from one end of Eurasia to the other with relative safety, his caravan protected by the stern peace of the Khans. And in those caravans, alongside silks and jewels, traveled the true seeds of global cuisine. Imagine a sack of durum wheat pasta, a staple of the Persian kitchen, slowly making its way toward China. Or a bundle of cinnamon bark from Sri Lanka and black pepper from India, journeying east to flavor the pots of a world that had never known them. The most famous legend, of course, is that of the noodle. While China had noodles for millennia, some historians argue that the Mongol Empire, and specifically the Yuan dynasty, helped accelerate their transmission westward, possibly laying the groundwork for what would become pasta in Italy. It is a delicious thought that the humble noodle's journey across continents was paved by the hooves of Mongol horses. The heartbeat of this culinary exchange was the imperial court. In Karakoram, and later in the magnificent capital of Khanbalik, the Khan's table became a map of the world. Envoys from Venice, scholars from Baghdad, and administrators from Korea all came bearing gifts of food and knowledge. The Mongol elite, curious and pragmatic, eagerly sampled these novelties. Persian melons were cultivated in palace gardens. Grapes from Samarkand were pressed into wines enjoyed alongside traditional arkai. Rice, once a rare luxury, became a staple grain for the settled court, prepared in pilafs flavored with saffron and cardamom acquired from the west. Cooks from conquered territories were brought to the imperial kitchens, creating fusion dishes that would have been unthinkable on the steppe. A roasted lamb leg glazed with honey and eastern spices, or delicate dumplings filled with minced meat and fragrant herbs. For the ruling class, food became a display of cosmopolitan power, a way to show that their dominion was not just over land, but over the world's bounty. Yet, for the common warrior guarding a distant frontier or the herder tending flocks on the ancestral plains. This global pantry remained a distant rumor. His diet was still defined by the timeless triangle of meat, milk, and marrow. He still reached for his bag of borts and his skin of airag. The elite in the capital might dine on sugared almonds and rosewater sherbet, but the strength of the empire still ran on the simpler, fiercer fuels of the steppe. This created a fascinating cultural divide, a split between the cosmopolitan palate of the court and the traditional tastes of the cavalry. The empire's stomach had expanded to encompass the world, but its heart still beat to the old familiar rhythms. And as the empire itself began to fade, that enduring connection to their ancestral diet would become not just a matter of taste, but a key to their very identity. That legendary endurance was not a matter of willpower alone. It was a metabolic fact, engineered by every meal. The Mongol warrior's body was a machine finely tuned by a specific, powerful fuel blend. Their diet provided an almost perfect balance of macronutrients for extreme physical output. First, the high protein from constant meat consumption. This wasn't just for building muscle, it was crucial for repairing the microscopic tears in muscle fibers caused by days of riding and fighting. Their bodies were in a near constant state of repair and rebuilding, and the steady supply of protein from borts, fresh meat, and organ meats provided the raw materials. Then the high fat content. We have discussed the fatty tails, the rendered blubber, the precious marrow. This fat was their slow-burning coal. While carbohydrates provide quick energy, they burn fast and can lead to crashes. Fat, however, provides more than double the calories per gram and releases its energy steadily over many hours. A warrior who started his day with a broth rich in animal fat was fueling a furnace that would burn all day, keeping him warm and energized without the need for constant snacking. This is where the contrast with their settled enemies becomes stark. The armies of Europe or China were often fueled by bread, porridge, and beer, diets heavy in carbohydrates. These foods could provide a burst of energy, but they required more frequent meals and digestion, and could lead to lethargy when that quick sugar rush faded. A knight might need to stop, dismount, and eat a substantial meal to keep going. A Mongol rider, however, had a metabolism humming on fat. He could sip from his airag skin, chew on a piece of aaruul, or swallow a few slivers of borts without ever breaking stride. His energy levels remained stable, his focus sharp. The only significant carbohydrates in their traditional diet came from the lactose in dairy, a sugar that is digested slowly, again preventing spikes and crashes. This nutritional profile meant a Mongol unit could cover distances that seemed impossible to their adversaries. They could ride for 18 hours, dismount to fight a brief, furious battle, and then remount to ride another 20 miles to a new campsite, all on the fuel they carried with them. Their minimal need for stops was not just discipline, it was biology. Their food allowed them to merge with their horses into a single, relentless organism, moving with a rhythm that grain-fed armies could not hope to match. But this biological machine ran on a strict moral code. For the Mongols, food was never just sustenance. It was a covenant with the natural world, governed by deep-seated taboos and traditions. Their identity as people of the open steppe dictated not only what they ate, but what they would never consider eating. Take fish. Living in a land of vast grasslands and few major rivers, fish were seen as creatures of a different, almost alien element. They were not part of the pastoral world of the Five Snouts, and thus held no place on the traditional menu. To eat fish was, in a sense, to betray the identity of the grassland rider. Similarly, many birds, especially scavengers like vultures or crows, were considered unclean. They were not hunted in the great Nerj drives, and consuming them was taboo, likely tied to spiritual beliefs about impurity and the soul. The animals they did eat were surrounded by ritual. The slaughter of a sheep was not a casual act. It was performed with precision and respect, often by cutting the aorta while the animal was laid on its side, a method believed to minimize suffering. Before cooking, they would often present the sheep's head to an elder or a guest as a sign of ultimate honor, acknowledging the life given. This reverence extended into law. Under Genghis Khan's Yasa, the legal code that bound the empire, wasting food was not just poor manners, it was a serious offense. Throwing away bones with meat still on them, or spilling milk carelessly, was seen as an insult to the spirit of the animal and a threat to the community's survival. Every scrap of fat, every bit of marrow, every drop of broth had to be utilized. This was not a suggestion, it was enforced discipline. A warrior who wasted food was squandering the very energy of the empire, and such an act could bring severe punishment. Their cuisine, therefore, was a perfect circle of use, bounded by spiritual respect and codified by practical law. What they avoided defined them as clearly as what they devoured, painting a complete picture of a people who saw every meal as a sacred transaction with the world they ruled. Yet the taboos of the past meet the tastes of the present. The legacy of the Mongol diet is not confined to history books. It lives on, steaming and fragrant, in the jars of modern Mongolia. The connection between the 13th century warrior and the 21st century herder is found in the daily rhythms of food. In rural areas, families still produce borts, hanging strips of mutton to dry in the crisp, clean air until they are as hard as wood, a perfect, lightweight protein for long journeys with the herds. You can still find aaruul, those sun-dried cheese curds, laid out on rooftops, transforming from soft white lumps into tangy, tooth-challenging snacks that are packed with energy. And in nearly every jur, you will encounter the leather sack, the cockhoor, gently churning with airag. The process is unchanged, a wooden paddle rhythmically stirring the mare's milk, the natural fermentation creating that slightly sour, fizzy drink that was once the lifeblood of an army. For Mongolians today, these are not historical recreations. They are living traditions, a direct thread to their ancestors and a proud symbol of nomadic identity. The national dish itself is a culinary time capsule. Korkhog, the method of cooking meat with hot stones, is prepared almost exactly as it was 800 years ago. A clean goat or sheep is butchered, and the meat, along with vegetables and a little water, is layered with scorching hot river stones inside a large metal container or even a sealed milk can. The lid is clamped shut, and the stones steam the meat from the inside out. When the container is opened, the stones, now coated in flavorful fat, are passed hand to hand as a warm, greasy treat, believed to strengthen bones and joints. Eating korkhog is not just a meal, it is a communal ritual that echoes the feasts of the steppe, connecting every generation to the landscape and the animals that sustain them. This continuity is profound. The modern Mongolian may have a smartphone in their pocket, but in their home, they preserve a food culture that powered the conquest of continents. The mystery of what the warriors ate is not a closed case. It is an ongoing story, told in every pot of boiling broth and every shared bowl of airag. But the echoes of those ancient feasts are often distorted by time. To truly understand the Mongol table, we must sift through the legends to find the facts. The most persistent myth is that of the savage, blood-drinking barbarian. Medieval chroniclers, writing in fear from behind castle walls, painted a picture of a monster who lived on raw flesh and blood. This was powerful propaganda, designed to demonize a terrifying enemy, but it is a profound misunderstanding of their culinary reality. Yes, in the direst emergency, a warrior might drink a small amount of his horse's blood to survive. But this was a carefully controlled medical procedure, not a daily meal. And yes, they might eat frozen meat on a long winter ride, but their preference, their cultural norm, was always for cooked food. The boiling cauldron was the heart of their home, not a roaring fire for roasting whole beasts. They were masters of preservation and preparation, not primitive scavengers. The legend of widespread cannibalism is even more fraught. These stories almost exclusively come from besieged cities, where terrified populations, watching their own children starve, projected their deepest horrors onto the enemy outside the walls. While starvation could force any army to unthinkable acts, there is no reliable archaeological evidence to suggest cannibalism was a standard or sanctioned practice. It stands in direct opposition to their strict food taboos and their reverence for the human form, which they believed should be returned to the sky without mutilation. So how do we find the truth? We look to the ground itself. Archaeology provides a quieter, more honest testimony. At Mongol campsites across Eurasia, scientists sift through ancient hearths. They find the fragmented bones of sheep, goats, and horses, but the patterns tell a specific story. The bones show precise butcher marks from knives, not the chaotic hacking of frenzied consumption. They find evidence of long, slow boiling to extract marrow and make broth. Perhaps most tellingly, chemical analysis of pottery shards reveals lipid residues, the ancient fingerprints of fat. These residues match the profiles of horse and sheep milk, and of animal fats, confirming the central role of dairy in stews. This silent evidence paints a picture of a disciplined, practical people, not the ravenous horde of legend. Their diet was a calculated engine of conquest, refined by necessity and bound by tradition, far removed from the sensational nightmares of those who feared them. The final ingredient in their conquest was not carried in a saddlebag, but baked into their very bones. We have traced the journey from the frozen borts to the imperial feast, but now we must step back and see the complete picture. The Mongol diet was not merely a cultural curiosity or a survival strategy. It was the single greatest non-military weapon in their arsenal. It provided a logistical advantage so profound it rendered their enemies' tactics obsolete. Consider the sheer physics of medieval warfare. A European army of knights marched at the speed of its slowest element, the ox-drawn supply wagon. These creaking caravans carried sacks of grain for bread, barrels of salted meat and fish, and casks of ale or wine. They required roads, they were vulnerable to ambush, and they dictated the army's pace and range. An army could only venture as far as its wagons could roll before needing to turn back or establish a new, vulnerable supply line. The Chinese armies, while often more sophisticated, faced a similar constraint. Their massive infantry forces were tethered to the agricultural heartlands and complex canal systems that brought them rice. Now place a Mongol tumen beside them. Every warrior is his own quartermaster. His food weighs pounds, not tons. It never spoils. It requires no cooking fire if he uses the saddle-cooked chumis. His drink, airag, is both hydrating and nourishing, safer than stream water. This meant the Mongol army moved with a ghostly silence and speed. They could appear from directions thought impossible, cross deserts and mountains considered impassable, and sustain themselves for months in hostile territory where a settled army would starve in weeks. Their strategic range was not measured in miles from a supply depot, but in the endurance of their horses and the contents of their personal bags. This logistical independence granted them the initiative in every campaign. They chose when and where to fight. They could feign retreat for days, luring a heavier army away from its supplies, then turn and annihilate them when hunger and fatigue set in. They could split their forces, knowing each unit was self-sufficient, to attack multiple targets simultaneously. The fear they inspired was not just of their arrows, but of their eerie, unstoppable persistence. You could not starve them out, because they carried a step's worth of calories on their person. You could not outrun them, because they ate while they rode. Their dinner plate was a strategic map, and it showed a path to total mobility. To understand the thunder of their conquests, you must listen to the quieter sound of a knife shaving slivers of borts into a pot, the gentle slosh of airag in a leather skin, the slow melting of aaruul in a rider's mouth. These were the sounds of an empire being built, 1 calorie dense, perfectly portable meal at a time. The true mystery of the Mongols is not how they fought, but how they fed the fight, turning the simple act of eating into the art of world domination. So the story of their meals becomes the story of their might. From the windswept steppe where they dried meat into stone, to the walls of ancient cities where they turned entire farmlands into their personal larder, the Mongol diet was a masterclass in adaptation. The horse was not just a mount, but a mobile dairy and a partner in survival. The ingenuity of preservation, from rock-hard borts to sun-baked aaruul, meant their supply line was strapped to the saddle, granting them a ghost-like speed. And that diet was never static. It absorbed grains from China, spices from Persia, and techniques from every corner of the map, all while holding firm to its nomadic core. This was not a cuisine of luxury, but a rugged, practical fuel system, perfectly engineered for one purpose: building the largest contiguous land empire in human history. Every meal was a calculated step toward domination. What part of this culinary engine surprised you the most? The fermented mare's milk, the saddle-cooked meals, or their strict water discipline? Share your thoughts below, and subscribe to join us as we solve the next great historical mystery.